guns in America. Now, after a tragedy like those in Tucson, Virginia Tech, Jonesboro, Columbine, and so many others, a nation mourns, and there's talk of never again. But then, as we always see, we typically move on and we put that in our rearview mirror. If anything, gun laws fuel debate have gotten weaker and more lax since these tragedies have taken place. But it seems that maybe, just maybe this time, things just might be different. And I'm hedging here because this is at this point just talk. In the aftermath of the movie theater massacre in Colorado, of course, against virtually unrestricted gun use, it is growing depending on where you are in this country. People are saying that enough's enough here. Mayors, governors, police officers and chiefs, lawmakers, and even regular citizens, if you look at the polls, are raising their voices in support of smarter gun control measures. Now, almost immediately after the massacre, you had the mayor of New York City, who's probably been the most vocal opponent of loose gun laws in this country, Mayor Michael Bloomberg. He made it very clear where he stood on the issue, and he called on the presidential candidates to put it out on the table where they stand and what they'll do about the availability of assault weapons.
Governor Romney signed a bill in Massachusetts prohibiting the sale of assault weapons, and he spoke eloquently about it. Today, he's not in favor of it. Barack Obama campaigned 4 years ago on a platform of saying he was going to try to ban the sale of assault weapons. It's done nothing since then.
All right, it's not just Mayor Bloomberg talking. You go to Capitol Hill, there were calls to restrict the availability of high-capacity ammo magazines.
We do not have to have citizens armed to the teeth so they can go in and kill innocent people. That is not freedom.
But you can leave even the federal government here, or even leave a mayor who's been vocal on the issue, and you can go to a state capital and hear some of the same calls. You go to Illinois, where the governor, Pat Quinn, is now pushing a bill that would ban assault weapons as well as those large capacity ammo magazines.
I think it's very clear that these particular weapons are not designed to do anything but to have human targets. It's imperative that we act.
Now, the lawmakers you just heard from all different levels of government, they might be talking about principles here where they believe there's a right and a wrong, but they also may be just listening to their constituents. And to help me out with this and break down the numbers, Andrew, you know, this has always been thought of as recently a third rail. You don't touch this, not just because of the NRA, but you got a portion of the population that's so fervent on this issue, you're playing with fire here if you try and really curtail any gun rights. But the numbers, they tell a different story.
If you're listening and looking at the numbers carefully enough, Rich, when asked in general about gun control and whether to make gun laws more strict, here are the numbers. And 43% still want who want stricter gun laws. That's an all-time low. But when asked about specific provisions, the numbers go up. When asked, should the U.S. ban high-capacity ammo magazines or clips, 63% of Americans say yes. Should the U.S. reinstate the assault weapons ban? 62% of Americans say yes. And should gun buyers have to submit to criminal and mental health background checks? A whopping 86% say yes. Rich?
All right, Andrew, thank you very much. And tonight, we thought that rather than just talking to either advocates or opponents of gun control, why not talk to somebody on the ground level who deals with gun violence here, the aftermaths, the costs not just in human lives, but in also all the costs that are attached to it. Well, we're going to hear from police chiefs and mayors as we continue this conversation, people who again deal with this in real time and can put real human faces to these issues. And tonight we're going to begin that series of conversations with the mayor of Paterson, New Jersey, Jeffery Jones. Mayor Jones, thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Richard. My pleasure.
All right, you know, for many of us, we saw the images unfold in Aurora, and while you certainly haven't had a scene like that play out in your city, you have had to go to far too many funerals. You've had to deal with law enforcement in your city on far too many shootings and fatalities. Put a human face, if you can, for the people at home, that not all these kind of deaths and shootings were all inevitable, that maybe, just maybe, with smarter laws, some of these things could have been prevented.
Well, without question, and I just want to make sure I say that very clearly, without question, the gun laws themselves won't change the behaviors of people. Some of that is some social issues that we need to address as a society. But clearly, more stringent gun control and a clear understanding of what even the smallest of weapons in the hands of someone who doesn't know the damage that it can do to not just the individual whose life they may take, but the rest of the members of that family and ultimately that neighborhood and that community, well, that's really the conversation. And funeral after funeral, having to try to explain the senselessness, funeral after funeral, trying to understand why someone who still has a life left to live would throw their life away. Are they conscious of that? These become the real challenges and the real issues that, as mayor, that I'm facing. Understanding how someone unemployed can get his hands on a weapon that, as an employed person, I can't afford, and the ammo that go with it. And to recklessly point a weapon in the direction of anyone, or without concern, shoot into a front window, into a car. These are real deep conversations, and be it an assault weapon, be it a handgun, be it any gun that can take the life of one, requires a real conversation and action. The time for conversation, I believe we're past. I believe the action time is now.
Well, let's talk about some of the action, because for people who don't know, Patterson's a great city, but it ranks as one of the 100 most violent in America. You certainly have had your share of gun violence here. What always surprises me is when we talk about this, people say, oh, it's got to be the bleeding hearts who are trying to do the gun grab and stuff. But I always tell people, I say, forget what I have to say. Why don't you talk to cops and talk to law enforcement, police chiefs here? There's some of the most vocal guys who say, it's crazy, we can go out in a situation and we're the police and we're outgunned. Can you articulate some of the frustrations from the police here about some of the kind of guns that are out there, some of the kind of ammo that these guys are having on their persons here, some of the perpetrators they're going after, and if not a sense of helplessness, certainly a justifiable frustration, if not fear, on the part of the cops?
Without question, you hit the nail on the head. Not long ago, I'd say about less than 2-3 weeks ago, we were able to coalesce 147 weapons, obviously, from a number of efforts, ceasefire and some other initiatives. On the table were shotguns, there were hunting rifles, there were Glocks. There are a number of weapons by which are, in comparison, the equal and rival to that of what law enforcement have. There were hollow point bullets. That's the type that would go through whatever you're wearing and leave a gaping hole in the back end. There are armored piercing rounds, the kinds that go through metal. Now, law enforcement is there to protect and serve. They are not going to be the stopgap of a bullet. The bullet's going to come through and rip through flesh like it would do us, and I don't mean to be vulgar or gross, but these are realities. These folks who are on the front line, they need to have all the proper equipment for the simplest things, cats in a tree, but definitely for someone who might be deranged on the street, happen to have a weapon of destruction and just starts firing. What happens when he or she or they collide? Rounds have to be spent in order to bring down this assailant, and then all hope is lost depending on the kind of weapon he or she is using, the kind of armament that it has, and the direction by which that gun is pointed. And now we're talking about massacre at a different kind of proportion, where we are engaged in trying to resolve it, but we're outgunned.
Hey, Mayor,
and one of the final things I'd say, yes.
No, one of the things I wanted to get from you is about the gun laws in the books right now, Mayor, because Jersey's got tough gun laws. And I'll hear people say, hey, we got enough laws in our books here in New Jersey right now. I mean, you can't do what you can do in Colorado, but can you explain what the term iron pipeline means? Because I hear a lot of mayors, Mayor Bloomberg, yourself, a lot of other mayors in New Jersey say, it doesn't matter what we have in our books. Guys are coming up from North Carolina, Virginia, and other places. These straw sales, they're flooding our streets with this, and we're left to clean up the mess.
Oh, you're absolutely right. Iron pipeline or casual road, federal road or state highway. The guns are making their way from the south, from parts of New York, we understand, and they're making their way into a community such as Patterson, where our economic level is not one that can support someone affording a $350 weapon, plus the rounds. And they're getting here as recently as someone was caught on a train carrying weapons, I think 3 handguns. And they're coming in the vehicles, the trunks of cars, and they're getting to our streets. And young folks or adults who are recently released from prison or wherever they're coming from have direct contact and access to these weapons. And they're getting them from a song and a dance. And some of the interesting things are the histories of these guns gets lost if someone turns it in on a buyback. So no matter what damage that gun may have done in North Carolina and Virginia on its way up here, if someone decides to use it and to turn it in on a buyback program, the history of that weapon and its destruction is lost. So we have a lot of laws on the books. The question is, what sense do they make if you have so many laws that just keep watering down the effect? Action needs to be taken, and we need to talk about it from, again, this level, other mayors, people on the street. That conversation has yet to be had.
Let me ask you, you can't get everything right now, and I know you work with a lot of other mayors who share your frustrations on this, but it seems that the attention of America right now is at least willing to have a dialogue. Andrew did some polls where the majorities of people believe we don't need to have assault weapons. The majority of people believe that the general population doesn't need to have these ammo clips. And the idea that background checks shouldn't be the exception, but be the norm. If you were going to ask lawmakers to focus on one thing, to try and get one thing through, so all 50 states had to play by the same set of rules, what would it be?
I would say assault weapons would be number one. Background checks are something that's a constant no matter what we do in America, and we need to be clear of that because of the Homeland Security thing. So that thing, I think, is pretty much on the table. But assault weapons are definitely something that we have to consider because, as a former Marine, listen, we use assault weapons when we go to war. You go to war with the express intent to kill and to maim. We're on public streets. There should not be a war out here that we don't know about. And we cannot arm ourselves as we would like we see in other parts of the world where battles are waging every day. We're going to have to take a different look and a different tact on how we want to preserve America and the future of Americans.
Hey, Mayor, I appreciate a few minutes. Jeffery Jones, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, everybody, I want to bring in our panel on this. Got Dominic Carter, political journalist and author. Speaking of military, former military man himself, retired Lieutenant Colonel Mark Rosen, veteran of the war in Afghanistan, assistant professor at West Point, and former congressional candidate in his own right, and our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman, who we've already met here. The military reference from a guy who wore a uniform like yourself. The idea that an AR-15 has a place in the American population. And I understand 50 states have 50 different voices and they'll make their own rules, but can you give me a logical reason why that needs to be in the hands of the general population?
Well, I support the Second Amendment 100%, but there are limits, and no one needs an assault weapon. So let's just put it out there and make logical rules that meet the needs of the vast majority of Americans. Don't let the fringe on the left and the extreme right dictate policy. Americans don't. Why does anyone need to be able to drop 100 rounds into a theater or any place for that matter? Do you need to shoot deer with 1,000 rounds or 100 quick fire rounds?
Sport, I would think.
So it's just reasonable. That said, I think it's very important to understand that gun control is not going to be the be-all and end-all to solving this problem. And just to wave this one wedge issue and saying, there you go, this is it, and not missing all the socioeconomic issues, the cultural degradation.
And I got to be honest, Andrew, you looked at, we had an assault weapons ban from 84 to 94, right? I'm sorry, 94 to 2004, and it didn't eradicate gun deaths, okay? So I'm not making a pretense to anybody at home that we can wave magic wands and everything disappears, but the funny part is the NRA members, they believe, almost half of them, that they're willing to go along with what, you know, the Lieutenant Colonel just said. You know, there is, I just think that we let the wrong people decide for everybody what we can and can't do. The fringes, as you said, on both sides of this shouldn't be mandating or dictating the terms of the conversation, and I just think too often they are.
Well, now you're asking a political question, which is the strength of the NRA and what they have in terms of manpower and money, and how they're able to influence lawmakers, and in some cases scaring them out of taking votes on gun control issues. So I think if there was enough of an outcry from the public, you would see lawmakers responding differently than they are now. We're waiting for that outcry.
Dom, you hear mayors, and we're going to hear more throughout the week and the next, because I want to hear from these guys. I want to hear from the police, who's going to tell me what they really see every day here. They're fatigued, and it doesn't matter what their political affiliation is, because the one word you keep hearing from them off camera is, what a waste. What a waste. How many kids just this week in the 5 boroughs died out of senseless shootings here. And so often you got kids that are the victims. You got to figure, if somebody can just harness the fatigue of the public here with these kind of stories, they'll be on to something.
I just don't see it, Richard. I hate to be the pessimist at the table. I just don't see it. Mayor Bloomberg has been leading the effort against guns for what, 5 or 6 years, and putting his money where his mouth is, putting up his own money to do these sting operations in Virginia and so on. And we agree that there's consensus. There's no need for assault weapons. You cite the polling of the NRA members. But yet, notice the last time we had the ban, it barely passed by 1 vote, as we've talked about, and no one's talking about it now. So I hate to be the pessimist, but I just see this all as mayors of big cities and law enforcement people.
We're heavy, we got to go to break, but we have times in this country seen acts of political courage, and I think that if it's done the right way, if people know that this isn't a move for a bigger gun grab, but if you can limit what we're talking about, instead of saying gun control broadly, but say assault weapons, or say ammo clips, or talk about background checks, I believe there is a political courage if somebody can tap into it. You're proven more right than I am on this, Dominic, but I think there's a possibility.